Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Visibility Era, the podcast. This is our very first episode of 2025, which I'm so excited about. So today we have our dear friend Courtney Weimer. She is a social media manager and a content creator based out of Chicago. And we actually met through a mutual friend who is in, I always say, like, digital spaces, especially like social media, PR, like we're kind of in that visibility bubble. So I met someone, hi, that is another publicist who was like, you need to meet my friend Courtney. She's amazing. I feel like you guys would just hit it off. And of course we have. So Courtney, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited.
Yeah. So I know that we spoke a little bit before this, had like a little pre-call, and you told me about your fashion background. I feel like we have so much crossover in terms of like, I was in, one of those like big spaces. So I was in music, you were in fashion, and we both kind of had a similar crossroads moment of like, do I still want to do this or do I want to go figure something else out? So for those of you who do not know your background, can you please just like dive into your fashion background, how you got into what you're doing today, all the social media stuff?
Of course. I know. I feel like it's usually like I could talk about it for hours and hours. So I'll try to keep it a little shorter, or on the shorter end of the time frame. But as far as my background goes, I went to school for fashion merchandising and marketing. I graduated in December of 2019, which is so crazy. I like cannot believe it's already been 5 years. I'm just like, where has the time gone? But right after graduation, I got a job in Chicago. So I'm originally from Ohio, got a job in Chicago as a visual merchandiser, which I actually interned for beforehand. Like I knew I kind of wanted to go in the visual space of the fashion industry, but just didn't really know what job would take me there. So I got a job 2 weeks after graduating. Literally started my job in Chicago at Neiman Marcus, visual merchandiser, freshly 21 years old. Right in January of 2020. So obviously the time frame 3 months later, COVID hit. So that job was super, it was just like such a great first job to have right outside of college. My team was amazing. It was my first time living away from home. So it was just like a lot of new and exciting things to, look forward to. And then obviously COVID hit and everyone kind of got let go slash furloughed for the time being during the pandemic. So I was actually living in Chicago alone. I like didn't know anyone in Chicago when I moved there, which is so crazy to think about now. I mean, like now it's so easy to meet people because of like social media and like obviously social media was very relevant back then too, but I didn't like know I was freshly new to like the adult world. I just graduated college. I commuted to college, so I didn't really have that um that experience of like living on my own and meeting new friends and just kind of like networking that way. So when the pandemic hit, I was kind of like really by myself. I knew my coworkers, but obviously they had families and they weren't even in the city at most of the time. So I decided to go back to like my mom's house for the time being for like 2 to 3 months, kept my apartment in Chicago, but kind of just didn't want to be by myself, especially like when everything was going on and everything started. It was like no one really knew what to do. And like it was just a scary time to be like by yourself. So went home for a couple months, came back to Chicago, still had no job. Um, During the time of my career, like the 3 months I was working as a visual merchandiser, I wasn't necessarily like happy. uh the fashion industry I feel like is very glamorized in general. Like obviously to be a part of it, it's amazing, but to actually work in it, it's a whole other story. I mean, my job was very physically demanding. I was lifting like 70-pound boxes daily, mannequins, like painting, getting things all over me every single day. So the things we made were really pretty, but on the other end of the spectrum, I wasn't really making any money, especially as like a career. And then also just like very physically demanding. So I wasn't necessarily like happy with my position. I just didn't really know where I wanted to go. And I was still so young. I graduated college early, kind of like 3.5 years for my bachelor's degree. I was 21, so I was kind of young for my grade. So I really never had a chance to kind of sit there and think like, what is it that I actually want to do? And, obviously like you need money to survive, especially in the city. So I kind of had some time to think, sit with myself and think about what I wanted to do. And I stumbled across the virtual assistant space, and kind of just like started taking on admin clients for like sending contracts, invoicing clients, things like that for like people who own their own businesses online. And then I started doing a lot of social media based um, tasks for them as well. So then I kind of started getting my foot in the door of like, oh, I actually really like doing social media management for people or like creating and being creative in general. So leading into, I guess like I started that in September of 2020. A year later, I was full time. I mean, I was full time, like I kind of took the chance like 2, 3 months after I decided to become a virtual assistant, which is so crazy. I like had no money to my name. And I'm like, I guess we're just gonna go for it. I feel like 2020 was like the year of like kind of, if this doesn't work, then like, there's nothing we can really lose from this.
Yeah.
So a year later, social media management started really taking a hold of like my transition of like who I was and like what I told people I did. And here I am, like over 4 years later, managing my own business. I have several clients. I primarily work with fashion brands, lifestyle brands, online creatives that really align with my interests and just like my overall likes for the industry. So that's kind of how I got here. There's a lot of other details that I can go into if later asked, but that's kind of like long story short.
Yeah, no, that was perfect. And I think about like, so most of our listeners are millennials. I'm a millennial. Bridget's a millennial. And so we didn't have that experience of like leaving school and then a pandemic hit and you're going
Right,
into a new job. Like there's so much new that happens after college. It's like they basically pop you out and you're like, okay, now I'm an adult. Like, now what? What is happening?
right.
So, what was that experience? Just out of curiosity, like, leaving school, moving to a new city, starting a new job, like was it virtual? Were you in person? Like what was that chaos like? It must have been like chaotic.
It was so chaotic. I feel like throughout my life, like school, I was never like the best at everything. Like I never really like was super athletic. I was never the smartest person in my class. So like being so young when I graduated wasn't necessarily like planned. Like I didn't go into college thinking like, oh, I'm going to graduate early and I'm going to like get a job right outside of college. Obviously, that's the goal is to like have something lined up before you graduate, but it kind of just lined up that way. Like I feel like the couple months before I graduate, I was just like applying to as many jobs as I wanted. I applied to places in New York. I applied to places in LA because that's where my internship was the summer prior. So I was like, oh, like I'll just kind of like throw something, hope it sticks. And, obviously I got this job in Chicago, which I'm so, so grateful it got me out here because it was, I love the city. It really is just like a home away from home. And I just like couldn't imagine my life if I ended up somewhere else. Obviously that's like for future, reference, like if I ever want to move anywhere else, but I'm just really happy this is like where I started. But as far as like graduating, I had my job already lined up. So I got hired like mid-November, graduated December, and they knew I was graduating. So I was like, okay, I'll just like start the new year. So like right after I graduated, my mom and my stepdad like drove me out here with all my stuff. We moved me into my first apartment. Super scary. I feel like a lot of people don't talk about that, especially when you lived at home with surrounded by family for so long. Like I don't really have a big family, so leaving what everything I knew was like super just like intimidating and you really didn't know what to expect. And obviously, luckily we have like FaceTime now and there's just so I like literally to call my mom every single day. So it's like very easy to stay in touch. But as far as that timeline goes, it was just like it was scary, but just like super exciting because I didn't have to worry about like passing classes anymore, like turning in homework. Like I was also working during college, like part-time. So like I had feel like I had so much more on my plate back then versus like when I got a job here, I was like working and I was getting paid to do so, very little, but I was still getting paid and I really didn't have to worry about anything else besides my job and like, obviously if I wanted a social life or not. So, scary, daunting, but very exciting. And obviously like those first 3 months were so much fun. I just like loved experiencing adulthood in the very beginning of 2020. But as soon as the pandemic hit, it was like so weird how everything started. Like I feel like it was like mid-February, things started getting kind of weird. People were talking about like this sickness that
Yeah.
was going around or whatever. And like back then, like you're just like, oh, like we survived the bird flu or all those other like things that have come up in the past. They never were as big as they said they were going to be. So I feel like a lot of people kind of thought it was going to be the same. I personally did. I was like, oh, there's literally no way. And then my brother was actually still in college, and so was my boyfriend, and their colleges like canceled classes for 2 weeks. It was like beginning of March. And I was like, that is so weird. I'm like, also, I was like kind of like bummed. I'm like, that's not fair. They get a break. Like, this is
I
so
didn't
not
get
cool.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like working full time now. I'm like, damn, like, I really wish, like, I was still in college, whatever. And then obviously, like, a couple days later, they were like, oh, everyone has to stay home for 2 weeks. Like, we're like closing the store. Like, I still remember the night that I was leaving my work. So that night we were shutting down all of the windows, closing everything up just to make sure everything was safe. Because obviously we obviously thought that it was only gonna be 2 weeks. Like, oh, we have a 2 week break. This is amazing. And Michigan Avenue, which is like the main shopping area in Chicago downtown. And I remember Ubering down and I was looking out the windows and it was like a ghost town. Like I have never seen the city like that prior to this. And it was like a very eerie feeling. And I was like, oh, something's about to go down. Like I just had a feeling like this is gonna like change a lot of things. And then I ended up driving home the next morning, stayed there for a couple months, and obviously, things kept snowballing and here we are now. But it was definitely fun before the pandemic hit. But I always say this, I'm very just grateful it happened the way it did because I was able to actually sit and think about what I wanted. And I actually had the opportunity to change my trajectory of like where I wanted my career to go. Because if the pandemic didn't happen, I might still be at that job. I might still be in the fashion industry or like whatever. And, my life would have probably still been amazing, but very, very different.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. And I think in 2020, a lot of people had that opportunity to just like sit back and be like, well, my job is paused, or work is paused, school is paused, or maybe I'm like working from home and I have more time. I like don't have the commute and all the things going on and all the people to see after work. And I can actually
Yeah,
sit and ask myself, like, what makes sense for me and what I want to do. So I think if we're looking at the silver lining, that was the blessing and everything. It was like we were
right.
able to take that pause for ourselves. So thank you for that. Transitioning over to the meat and potatoes of social media and all of that. I absolutely love your site. I love your work. I
Thank
think it's
you.
so beautiful and really aesthetic. And
Thank
so,
you.
speaking of aesthetic, even your background, the way that you showed up today, um, how does the background in fashion translate to what you're doing online for people?
Oh my gosh, such a big part of my business. I feel like it's really interesting because I feel like when I first started my online business, I was really scared of letting that part of me go because that's really all I ever knew. I never had like these big, like, I was never, again, like, I was never an athlete. I never wanted to be really anything else. I just knew I wanted to work in fashion or something creative. Like, I just really was drawn towards that my whole entire life. So I felt like when I started my business, it wasn't as like glamorous as the fashion industry is known to be. So I was really afraid of letting that part of myself go because I feel like, oh, I'm not going to be like in a creative field anymore, or I'm not going to be able to like, I don't know, just like be in the environment of all these creatives and like fashion designers, things like that. Which again, I was gladly mistaken because my career is more creative than it ever has been and probably could have ever been in the fashion industry. So I think like my background of like graphic design in college, like I did a lot of graphic design for my major. Um, Everything I see in like magazines and everything I see online is fashion related or beauty related in some way. And that's just like a part of me. And I really play that into my creativity when it comes to creating for my own business and obviously creating for my clients, whether my clients are in the fashion industry or not, or if they're in, even a creative field that has nothing to do with fashion, like I still, um, how do I say, like I still grab creativity or inspiration from different industries, no matter what industry my client is in. So my client could be a photographer. I'm creating a really cool reel or a really cool piece of content for them. I might grab inspiration from an interior design account or an interior magazine. Like it's so broad. I feel like the creative like industry on the in the online space is so deep that you can really just like make original content wherever you go. I feel like a lot of people, tend to follow the trends and, they really want to go viral and like do all the right things. But at the same time, in order to stand out, you really have to think broad. Like you really have to
Yeah.
think like just because you're in the fashion industry doesn't mean you have to only pull inspiration from other fashion designers or other fashion brands. Like you can go into nature. I mean, I feel like a lot of like newer brands like Loewe and people like or brands like that, like they pull inspiration from food. They pull
Yeah.
inspiration from nature, which is so intriguing, and that's what catches people's eyes. So that's kind of what I do with my like process of creating for me and my clients is I really just like there's no limits of where I look for inspiration.
Yeah. Wow. I absolutely love that. So when we, okay, say you're working with a new brand and they, I'm just going to hypothetical here. Their social presence is a little bit of a mess. What do
Okay.
you do with them when you first start out? Maybe what questions do you ask them to get them to a place where like they absolutely love their social accounts and like what's your creative process behind that?
I ask a lot of questions in my questionnaire, especially in the beginning, because at the same time, like some people only want social media help. So maybe they're just looking for someone to create reels for them, which
Hmm.
I will do every now and then. But most of the time, when people are booking me, they're booking me for the full social media management. So
Yeah.
if we are going in that direction, I am asking them very, very detailed questions of what are brands that you love that you like just love their visual identity. It doesn't have to necessarily be like the industry you're in. Like, what do you really love about their social presence that you wish you can have within your own brand? Obviously, like pulling inspiration is so different than just like mimicking people. So I never want to be like, oh, you're going to look exactly like this brand that you
Yeah.
really, really love because you want to stand out and you want to be different. But at the same time, like all of those accounts that they'll link, they'll have something in common. They'll have like maybe more earthy tones or maybe like they're I usually only work with clients who have like professional branding done just so we're staying like consistent and we're not starting from scratch because as a social media manager I feel like a lot of times people who are hiring social media managers think that we take care of branding if they don't have branding. So it can be like a lot of work and a lot of back and forth if they don't have professional branding done. So I do really like to stick to that, especially if they are more established. But we can kind of see like, do you like the trends? Do you like the trends that they're putting out in terms of their own industry, their own content? But if they aren't liking the trends, they're like, I really want to stay away from all trends. I want to just like pave the way for my industry and be very, very different and very, very authentic. So I ask a lot of questions like that. I always say, like, even with my new branding in Doe Studio, like, I really wanted to showcase that creativity is a natural state. Like, we all create every single day, no matter how creative our careers are. Like, we're natural artists, no matter what we do. Maybe you're an artist in organizing, you're an artist of having routine. Like, there's so many different ways that we're creative every single day. So, when I'm working with a client who their social media is all over the place or they don't really know which direction to go in or maybe they're not necessarily a creative industry, like I still let them know that they are creative in their own way and it's okay to not have a super strict strategy involved because especially in the beginning you want to try things out, you want to see
Hmm.
like, oh, I really like talking about this, or you post about something, you're like, I really like how much engagement I got from it, but I don't really like feel proud showing this piece of content. Like there's such a big difference between going viral, with a video that you put together in 2 minutes versus something that you really put a lot of time and energy in and you want to show it off. Maybe it doesn't have as much engagement, maybe it's not as many likes or views or whatever, but that's something that you will show future clients or future customers like this is what I do and I'm very, very proud of it versus something that took 2 seconds, went viral, and it was just like a quick, silly trend, if that makes sense. So creativity is very natural. It doesn't have any restrictions. So it's almost like being in that childlike state again, where you're free to create without feeling judged, if that makes sense. So like when clients work with me and I'm working with them, I really, really reiterate that. Like, I'm not judging you. Your audience isn't judging you, even if you think they are. Like, this is your page, this is your brand. Like, you can do whatever you want with it.
Yeah, I love that you said that this is something that other people are going to see. I tell a lot of my clients that like their visual branding and PR go so hand in hand together because branding isn't just visuals. It's like words, it's the way you represent yourself, it's the way you position yourself. So, for anyone that's listening, make sure that you take a look at your branding in 2025. But going back to that, I always joke around that like Instagram is kind of like your business card. I feel like people go to social media first before they go to the website. I do
Totally.
personally. I'm always like, ooh, let me
Same.
like follow them on Instagram or something because it's a way to stay in touch. So even if
Hmm.
you just meet them out and look at their website, I'm not going to remember like the URL like
Same.
tomorrow, but I'm going to have them on Instagram, right? So for somebody who is kind of figuring out their digital footprint, um, when you ask them like I guess in your questionnaire all of these things is one of your questions like their goals because I love that you mentioned some of them want to do like the viral thing whereas others want to kind of like create authentically and kind of just be like no I want to pave the way. So
Hmm.
how does somebody look at their overall goals and then measure their I guess like strategy to that?
Yeah, when it comes down to goals, I always ask, like, are your goals monetary? Like, do you, obviously the goal is to make money and
Yeah.
like survive and, all that. But at the end of the day, like when you're building a brand, there's so many different aspects to it. Like, obviously you want to make money, you want to make sales, but you also want to remain true to what you believe in and what you want to, I guess, convey to the overall digital world. So I always ask, like, what are your goals that you have when working with me, and how will you measure that? So sometimes people will say, oh, sales, I'll measure it by how many sales we drive in through social media, or it'll be the measuring will be if our the following grows, or if I guess overall, like if the visual identity is like showcased very well on social media, that's something that they'll measure. So
Yeah.
there's so many different people that I work with that have different goals, which is so fun. And I feel like that's what keeps my job going in a way that's not boring and just like same old, same old. So I guess like in terms of like measuring it, it's very important to um, be intentional with
Hmm.
expectations, because I feel like a lot of times when you're hiring out a social media manager or someone to honestly just like work on your social media, it doesn't have to be a social media manager, it could be a content creator, it could be for UGC related purposes. They think that that's like the missing piece of their business, right? Like you think that having a social media manager will be the missing puzzle piece to everything, where you're making so much money and your business is successful, but at the same time, like if you think about it, like bigger brands, they have like 17 different departments. They have a social
Yeah.
media department, they have a marketing department that oversees social media, maybe it's PR, maybe it's like art direction, creative direction, whatever. Whereas like when you're freelance, you're kind of doing all of those things at once. I'm sure like in your position, you're doing your job, your duties, but you're also doing other things that businesses would pay a working salary to someone else to do while you're like managing so many other things. So you have so many different hats on, where, it's important to kind of stay focused and be consistent. And these are the expectations that you have. I'm not going to meet those because you think I'm going to be able to do all these things, or it's going to be like the magic recipe to why your business isn't doing well in general. Like it's really important to manage those expectations early on, because it's not even like in a bad way. Like some people just
Yeah.
think that that's the way it's supposed to go.
Totally.
But when I fill them in on, hey, like this is what I do, this is the goal to get you there, but here are other things that if it's not necessarily going to work all at once, like hiring a professional photographer that understands your visual, like having campaigns seasonally where, there's an art director involved, there's a creative director involved, there's a photographer that understands the whole overall like shot list. There's a social media manager that's helping you with the behind the scenes portion of it. Like there's so many different things that go into having a successful business. Do you need all these things? Absolutely not, but one person can't do it all. So that's kind of how I go about measuring their expectations, their goals, and making sure we're meeting those or reducing them to, hey, if this is your overall goal, here are other freelancers I know that can help you get you there. Like I work with so many, like a lot of my clients, like I work with like other creatives on their team. Like they have a whole team of people who are doing their campaigns. They're, reaching out to influencers. They're doing all these different things. And I'm also doing the social media part of it. So they're covering all the bases because they want to get their business to the next level versus just expecting one person to do it all, if that makes sense. So hopefully that
Yeah.
answered your question. I can get on a tangent sometimes. So if I'm not, you're
No,
like, hey, let's
this
reel it
is
back in.
this is perfect. I have so many
Okay.
pieces now that I want to touch
Okay.
on because we do the same thing. Like we tell people PR is not number one a sales strategy. It can
Yep.
get you to your goals over time, but it's a long-term strategy. Same thing with social media. It's like these are the pieces that you need to be a business that's operating well. And I love what you said about like, okay, you might not need all of these things. And especially if you're newer and starting out, it's like, what can we delegate first that's going to move the needle for you? And then as you grow, maybe you get another creative on board or like another freelancer on board. And so, all of these pieces of like building a very positive brand image online, I think it really starts with branding and then it kind of ripples out from there. And you can then get, the social media manager, you can get the publicist and really create a beautiful online presence. But in terms of these branding pieces, like, why don't we just like hit maybe some assets that you ask for? I know you mentioned photography. So, like, what other branding assets would be great to have on hand for a really successful social media strategy?
I always ask for their brand guidelines if they have it. Sometimes when usually I still work with people who don't have professional branding done. So if they're kind of DIYing it or they've like experimented with the colors they really like in their brand or, maybe they DIY'd their logo, that's totally fine. I'm never like sticking my nose up. Like I cannot work with you if you don't have professional branding because like
Yeah.
that's just not realistic. And sometimes people are super creative and they want to do it themselves. That's totally fine. Whereas like I said, going back to like the secret recipe, like the perfect branding isn't going to get you sales. The perfect
Totally.
social media strategy isn't going to get you sales. Like it can, but that's not the end all be all. So I always ask for brand guidelines if they don't have that logos, color palette that they stick into or stick with. I ask for, if they have any like stock image photos, if they don't have professional photos done. Again, I don't need those. If they take really great pictures of themselves, or if that's something we need to work on during our time working together, I will ask that. I'm like, just start taking pictures of yourself like every other day. It's like honestly practice. Like if you don't have the budget to have professional branding, that's totally fine. We can utilize stock photo websites like Pexels or Unsplash or things like that that can kind of align with that professionalism versus, going through a professional branding shoot or you know, delegating, a couple $1,000s for a photographer to take your photos, which again, that's a huge investment for a lot of people who are just starting out. And then if we need, more personal pictures, I'll tell them like, just start taking pictures of random things. You kind of have to
Yeah.
start becoming your own content creator, especially when you don't have the budget to invest in a shoot. You just need to start like practicing that part of your brain, like yeah, you don't have to go on and like go on TikTok every day and just spit out opinions everywhere, but just start taking pictures of your everyday life. Do like a coffee run, take a picture of the coffee shop you visited or take a picture of like your computer screen when you're working or doing things like that. And when people work with me, I'm usually giving them detailed descriptions like if we're creating a reel for like next week
Hmm.
or that month, I'm telling you exactly what I need. Like I'm telling you down to the last second. If the reel's 8 seconds long, I'm telling you every single second of what I need. I need 3 to 5 videos of you going about your day. Maybe it's like a day in the life, or maybe it's just like a quick coffee run. I'm telling you exactly what I need. I'll link inspo. So kind of setting you up in the best way possible, especially if you aren't that normal or comfortable content creator yet. Because most of the time when people are working with me, they're not. Like, that's
Right.
totally fine. Like, people aren't hiring a social media manager because they're good at social media. Like, they're hiring a social media manager because they need help with that part of their business. So, if people are up for it, which they usually are when they're working with me, they're excited. I'm making them excited to create content for their business. So it's not just like, oh, it's almost like having someone holding you accountable. Like, I'm telling you exactly what I need, and I'll keep reminding you to do it until you do it. So it's almost like having a business manager, but a social business manager, if you can say that. Like, I'm giving you art direction for every single post. Like, you won't feel like you're being like left out to dry. Like, I'm not just being like, oh, I need this picture from you. Just like get it to me whenever. Like, I'm telling you exactly when I need it and when.
Yeah, and I love that you have this creative background and also are an entrepreneur yourself because you understand that like people do wear a lot of different hats. So I love that you said you're like a business manager, but like not because it is same thing with PR. Like I'm going to tell you, actually, one of our clients recently got a ton of press, which is great. And so now I'm going to let them know, like, hey, you need to put those logos on your homepage. You need to create a media page on your website. You need to put that on your Instagram. And I'll tell them exactly how they should do it. And these aren't necessarily like pieces of my job. I don't need to tell them how to update their website, but like I understand what the overall pieces of the puzzle are. So I love that you help your clients with that too, because I feel like it's almost like your own like cheerleader or advocate for your business, in addition to the things that you're actually asking them to do on a daily basis, like the day-to-day social media stuff. So when you're
Yes.
working with a client, do you create like a content calendar with them? Like what programs do you use? I'm just curious because I feel like for a lot of people, and I'm sure you hear this constantly, social media is overwhelming. It's like, how do I create all this content? How do I be creative? I have to look at the calendar, I have to do this, I have to make sure it's trending. So like, how do you kind of like ease that process for your clients? I'm sure they love working with you because it feels like a
Yeah.
big, like thing, but yeah, tell us like your process of that.
Yeah, so I live and die by ClickUp. I love ClickUp. A
Ooh,
lot of
what's
people
that?
don't. It's pretty much like it's almost like how Notion is. I don't know if you know of Notion. Like,
We are
yeah,
Notion nerds.
yeah.
Our whole
Okay, so
business
it's
is on
either
Notion.
I feel like people either love Notion or they love ClickUp. It's never like
Okay,
the in
cool.
between. Like, I personally don't love Notion. I love the way it looks, but in terms of social media management, ClickUp is a lot easier for me because it's almost like it's more user friendly, and I feel like it's easier to read in terms of like someone just entering that space
Yeah.
versus someone who maybe doesn't know Notion or knows ClickUp. So ClickUp is pretty much just like another Notion, but the way it's set up is a little bit different. You can create a board, you can create a list, you can create a content calendar within it, which I usually do. You can do the content or the calendar view, which I love. But I usually do 4 different processes. So I do a to-do section, in progress, needs review, and then ready to post. So every piece of content that I create for my clients go through 4 stages. So
Mm.
like it's never like, oh, I'm working on this, it's done, it's like ready to go. Like, it goes through so many different transitions. Like, maybe it needs a couple more revisions, or maybe something has come up and they're like, oh my gosh, can we post this real quick? Like, this is like trending, or like this just happened and I'm really excited about it. So I'll move things around, whereas like we have the opportunity to do so versus like maybe some people who do their own social media, maybe they're only creating a post once a week and it's very like in the moment. Some people, as a social media manager, I want to be as consistent, and I guess like work in advance as much as I can, because some people don't have the time to dedicate like every single day to their social media, which, as I am for their business, like I'm working on their social media every other day probably, because that's just like, obviously you're paying me to do something and I want to
Totally.
do the best I can, versus that's the reason why they're paying me to do it because they don't have the time to do that. So ClickUp is like my go-to. A lot of my clients love it. Some clients already have been using it. But if they really want to use Notion or something else, I will usually like meet them in the middle and be like, okay, like let's start out with this. Like I can kind of work with that just because I don't want them feeling so like it's kind of like how the new year starts where like everyone has new year resolutions and like the first Monday of the year you're like waking up you're like oh my gosh I have so many things I need to do so many new things to learn and I don't want them to feel that way where it's like very intimidating. It's already intimidating spending all this money and investing into something like this. So I want to make sure that they feel as comfortable as possible, especially in this transition period where I am learning more about their business and seeing what they do and what they don't like with their social media and like, if we're moving in the right direction. So ClickUp, yes. I use Milano. I don't know if you're familiar with that. That's usually for like grid design for me. So every single post that I do, like
Cute.
the in progress section, I'm like putting it in the grid, screenshotting different options for what the cover looks like every single post. Like I feel like a lot of people times people will be like, "Oh, you're just like creating a post and just posting it." Like there's just so much that goes into it, like especially when you're doing it for someone else because you want
Yeah.
to make sure that it feels the most like their brand and like them. Like I don't want to just like dictate what they're posting because at the end of the day, like I could do that, but that might not like resonate with their audience. Their audience follows them for a reason. They don't follow me. They don't follow my opinions. They don't follow, I guess, like my overall viewpoints of things. So it's like I really want to make sure that we're staying, true to who they are and like what they believe in. So Milano, very key for grid planning. I grid plan just like on my iPhone. Like I just do like an
Yeah.
album and I'll like rearrange the blocks. But overall, I like to keep things all on my computer because I try to stay off my phone as much as possible. Try to. And that's pretty much it. Like I usually like I message my clients, like we talk through text. Like obviously there's a lot of like boundaries with that where, we don't message each other after a certain time. And, I would never like cross the line where I'm like messaging them in the middle of the night, like, hey, I need this. Like it's usually email, iMessage, ClickUp is like where everything is, where all the content is. So everything's in one place. And then even in the Milano, like they have view of that, like they can see it if they want, but I screenshot it and put it in the ClickUp every single time I upload like a grid design option or a cover option. So they don't even need to use that. It's more just like for my viewing purposes. So ClickUp is like where everything is. And I like to keep things like all in one place for them because it does get overwhelming. It really does, especially when someone else is like planning out your whole month's worth of content. Things start getting blurry and crazy. So I try to, you know, diminish that as much as possible.
Yeah, I love that there's a process too, and there's platforms. I think back in the day, or like I remember when I first started my own business and like posting, I would try to create this like spreadsheet on like Google Drive, and it's not visually right. Like you need a
Yeah.
calendar, you need like color coding and like check boxes, like
Yes.
you need those things. So I love that you have the right processes and the right systems in place for that. I think that alleviates so much of like the anxiety diving into getting into something
Right.
like that.
And I think like it's really interesting because I feel like if it is in like a list form, it can feel so overwhelming to
Totally.
someone who's just like, because they're not going to be checking, like my clients don't check the ClickUp every single day. And if it is in list form, sometimes it can be overwhelming. Like everything's kind of all together, like 30 days worth of, pieces of content are all in one place versus like in a calendar in different, like they don't have to look at the overall big picture. Whereas I just need them to look at the needs review section. Like
Yeah.
they don't have to look at anything else besides that section because everything else is on my end. Like if it's in the in progress section, I'm either asking them for something like, hey, like can you send me a picture of this if you have it, or like maybe just like asking them questions. But overall, the needs review section is like where everything is like revised, approved, or changed up, or changing the dates or whatever. So I really want to like strategize that in a way where it's like not too overwhelming for them. Because again, like it is overwhelming when
Yeah.
you hire someone on. It could feel like really exciting, obviously, and really like fun because you're like, oh, I'm at a point in my business where I'm able to invest in something like this. But it gets overwhelming fast because there's so many moving parts to it. So I try to alleviate that for them as much as possible.
Yeah. What would be your recommendation for somebody who maybe is just starting out thinking about like a social media manager, not ready to pull the trigger yet, but they are a founder, and I've heard this many times, that gets like that, what is it? Like frozen paralysis, whatever. And they're like, I know I
Yeah.
need to, but I just haven't actually posted yet. Or like, I've had a reel in draft for 2 weeks, but I haven't uploaded it. So, what would you tell them, advice wise, in terms of like posting? And then also, how many times a week should they be showing up? Stories versus the grid. I, I personally will tell them like it's better to post something than nothing, but also like what would your recommendation be for someone who just like, yeah, needs a little push.
Yeah. I always say post it now. Like,
Okay.
I feel like when I'm creating for my own, like my process for creating content for my own business is very different versus like my clients. I'm a little
Yeah.
more structured with my clients versus me. I'm kind of more in the moment. So, I'm not working with another social media manager who's running my business's social media. So when I feel most inspired, I'm gonna post it that day or the next. Like I will not, because if I don't, I'll just like not end up, you don't end up posting it because you
You
start
don't.
overthinking it. You
Hmm.
start looking at other things like, oh, maybe I should do this instead, or oh, that song isn't trending anymore for this reel. So maybe it's like better to scrap it. Because you can always talk yourself out of something. Like it's so easy to do. Like I do that every single day of my life. Like when I'm trying to stay on a routine for even a workout. Like
Oh
I
my God,
can
yeah.
easily talk, especially when it's like freezing cold out. I'm like, oh, it's just so cold. I like don't feel like getting up, or maybe I'll just do it tomorrow. And then you just find yourself in this cycle of continuously just like putting things off, and it kind of plays into every part of your life. So when you feel the most inspired, just do it. Like don't even like because your brain will literally trick you into like not doing something to staying comfortable. Like if it's something that you felt really inspired to do and you created this really cool piece of content, but it's kind of like something different and out of the ordinary, your body and your mind is going to try to keep you as safe as possible. So it's going to talk you out of it. It's going to be like, oh, well, you've never done anything. Like you don't want to offend, or you don't want to do this, or people are going to think you're weird or whatever. Like there are a million different excuses that your mind will use against you. So just post it. There's a reason why you created it. Just post it. And you can always archive it later on if you like really end up hating it. Like I posted things that I'm like, why did I post that? Like, it doesn't even make sense. Or like there's a typo in the graphic or
Yeah.
something happened where I'm like, oh, I can just archive it like a month later. Or if I'm like really not feeling it in the grid, I'll just archive it. So I really just like to specify like, just like post it now. All else fails, you can delete it later on. And then when it comes down to actually creating content for your business, like don't feel restricted to like staying on the super tight schedule of like you have to post every single day or you have to post 3 times a week. Cause I don't even do that for my own business. I mean, it's a little different because I'm posting content every single day for different people. So I kind of feel a little tired at times where I'm like, I don't really need to do this. I'm busy and I don't really feel like doing that. But if you are in a position where you really want to work on your social media and you're trying to grow your business's following or social media presence or just starting to like connect with your audience more, set a really small goal of like maybe once to twice per week. It doesn't have to be every day. It doesn't have to be super structured. Maybe do something that is a little more trendy or fun, and then something that's a little more informative or a little more like selling based versus like something that is like you don't have to have these strict, again, that's just my way of looking at things. Some people will tell you different. Other social media managers will be like, you have to stay on this really tight schedule, and it might work. Like, there's really no wrong or right for social media. It really just is like, if you can stay consistent, that's all that matters. Like, truly, that is all that matters. Like, you don't want to be setting something that's like, okay, you have to post 3 times a week, but you truly know you can't do that yet, and you don't have the time to do that, or you don't have the energy to do that. You're not going to stay consistent, and then it's just going to end up being like, ghost city for a month or two. Like you're just
Right.
literally you're just not going to post, and then you're like, oh wait, why is my audience like decreasing, or why am I not getting as much engagement? Because like you're kind of like over promising yourself, and then you're getting discouraged with the results. Like just like post when you feel inspired. Try to push yourself. If you're not too sure about a post that you created, just like post it. Just do it. Like obviously if it's something a little crazy, then maybe think it through. But
Yeah.
overall, like if it's something for your business, you felt compelled to create it in the first place. So just let the world see it. I mean, I was reading the Creative Act a couple months ago. Like creativity like is so universal where if you have an idea and you act on it and you don't like share it with the world, that specific idea and like creative idea is going to come out in another way. It's going to manifest in another way, whether you like it or not. So if you're not sharing it, someone else will. So like that's why I feel like a lot of times when people like have an idea and they don't like act on it and then someone else does it down the line, they're like, oh, like I was gonna post that, like darn, like they did it first. It's because that idea is meant to be shared with the world and it's meant
Yeah.
to be like, just shared and cherished and perceived in so many different ways. So just act on it now because it could be the best idea that anyone's ever seen. And it could be like the new viral it idea. Like you really just don't know. So just do it. That's all I
Yeah.
have to say.
Oh, I love it. And I think it depends on platforms too. Like Instagram is different from TikTok, is instant from YouTube. So like
Totally.
in, if you're someone who is just creating content, like I've heard so many stories. We had a like YouTube influencer on before on the podcast and she was like, "Yeah, so I just kept like making content and I basically had like no views." And then she had a health scare where she was in the hospital for, I think she said like months and
Wow.
didn't check her bank account. She would like her family was like taking care of her, whatever. And basically when she got out one day, she was like, let me check my bank account to see what's going on. She had over six figures in her bank account. One of her videos on YouTube went viral and that like sparked her YouTube career. So you just truly never know. And I think what you said also is perfect for New Year's goals when you were like, okay, don't set like these lofty goals. Like,
Yeah.
of course, Jan 1 hits and we want to have the perfect workout routine and have the perfect social media and like do this and do that. But like realistically, we can't go from 0 to 100. We need baby steps to create new habits for ourselves. So
Yep.
I love that you said like 1 to 2 posts a week. That feels so tangible for anybody who feels like that paralysis. And that's truly like all you need. I feel like for grid posts, obviously, if you have like a team or you working on it, we can do a lot more. But if you're an entrepreneur, we have a lot of business owners that listen to this who are in the like, I want to say like 4 year range, like it's still relatively new business.
Yeah.
And I think like posting a few times a week on the grid, 1 to 2 times, and then keeping your like stories active is like
Yep.
fantastic for engagement as you're starting out. So, how about we end on just like stories? I feel like we can talk forever. We should definitely
Oh
do
yes.
another episode. But in
I would
terms
love
of
that.
like, yeah, but in terms of stories, like what do you tell them to post? Because I feel like the big question is always like, I don't know what to post. And I love how you said, like, if you go to a coffee shop, like, take a picture, take a video, but like, what would
Hmm.
you recommend for somebody who's just going about their day and
Hmm.
wants to start really engaging with their audience in that way?
I think it's so, so important to utilize your stories. I'm just going to say that right in the beginning because I feel like a
Yeah.
lot of times people feel intimidated to post on their stories because they feel like it's almost like they're measuring it the same way they measure grid posts. Where I feel like stories you can kind of experiment more versus
Yeah.
like the grid post, it's there forever, like until you delete it, whatever. But with stories, like that's a perfect opportunity to get to know your audience. Like obviously when you post, you can get to know them by like if they're engaging with your content. But as far as stories go, like it's a little more not intentional, but a little more, what is it called? Like just like personal. Like cause like
Yes.
that's it's almost like deleting the blockade of like, the grid posts, like you can go to a celebrity's or a big brand's social media and like they have such beautiful content and maybe it's a couple sentences in their caption very discreet and mysterious, but you go to their stories and they're yapping away and they're asking questions and they're showcasing like, oh, I'm working on this in my business, or like what do you guys want to see from me in 2025, and like you feel like this almost like you're like in the in of like their life, and
Totally.
like they it's almost like because at the end of the day, like whoever posts on social media cares about their audience. Like whether you have a business or not, like if you're posting, maybe it's on your personal account and you're trying to like grow your following there and your own personal brand, which is again a business within itself. But like you still care about what your audience has to say because that's like literally what is making you grow. That's what's making you get to the next level. So asking those questions of like, what do you want to, including them in on your social media, including them in on your life, like, oh, like even if you're like a content creator and you're like fashion, you're a fashion creator, like going shopping and like taking mirror pictures in the fitting room, like, oh, which top should I choose or something like that, where it makes people feel included. Because at the end of the day, that's literally what people want, whether you're following a business or not. Like you want to feel like you're almost like included in their everyday or their big business plans, because that's truly what is making businesses thrive. That's what's making businesses successful is their followers and like their supporters and their customers. Like it's not just like they woke up one day and they're like, oh, I just have this beautiful brand and like that's it. Like they need sales to stay in business. They need, followers to get brand deals, like whatever. Like these are important ways which stories can, utilize like that audience and make it feel like, oh, it's not just business, it's not just sales. Like you actually care about what I have to say and like you're making people feel included. You're making people feel like it's almost like it's like a group effort. That's what I like to say because like especially when you're even if you have a small following, pretend you have under 500 followers, you're trying to build your business. Like that's how I built my following on my business's page is like literally asking like the 30 of my followers like, oh,
Yeah.
like what do you guys want to see from me this week on my content? And like there would be like one answer maybe and it was like from a family member or whatever. But that's still like it made me want to stay consistent of like really letting people know like you don't have to like tell or spill your secrets of like
Yeah.
what you're doing every single day, but it's just like a fun way to like include your personality. Like you kind of like
Yeah.
have fun and just like be silly, like I always love that. And I think I really appreciate that when like bigger creators do that because it kind of like sets the tone of like it's really not that serious. Like it isn't. Like obviously this is your career, but it's not that serious. Like everyone is a human. Everyone cares in their own way. Like just have fun, truly. Just have fun with your stories. Never take it too seriously. You can have beautifully curated stories. Those ones usually don't do as well. I'm gonna be honest. Like the picture that I snap of myself crying or whatever always does better somehow. It's
Yeah.
always the ones that happen like, more in the moment versus the ones that are super, designed and
Mhm.
planned out, if that makes sense. So that's my long story short.
That was perfect. So basically, just be yourself. It's not that deep. And ask your followers. I feel like we are our own best, like, what is it, customers. So like I
Hmm.
personally, I know what I like to see on stories, and there's certain accounts where I'm like, ooh, they posted something new and they show up like first because I'm always
Yes.
watching them and I'll engage with their content. I'll like add my little like 2 cents with if they're asking a question or whatever. So if you like engaging in a certain way, odds are your clients do too, or like your
100%.
or like your audience does. So I loved this advice. This was so fantastic. Thank you so much for being on with us today.
Thank
Oh
you
my
for
God.
having me.
It was just so good. It was so good. We'll have to have you on for another, conversation, diving into the nitty-gritty of social media because I feel like there's so much like happening all the time and it's ever changing.
So much. And I can like go on for days. So I'm happy this is only like an hour long because I could like talk for I don't know if you can tell, I could just get on tangents and it's so easy for me to just like keep going and going. So I'd love to be on again whenever you want me.
Oh, yes, me too. It's so funny. Bridget's like, all right, we're going to keep this one to 30 minutes. And I'm like, it's going to be probably an
Yes.
hour.
Yeah. You always have to like plan lower than what you're aiming for because you just know you're going to continue to talk. That's how I am. Even like when I'm with friends, I'm like, oh, we're only going to meet up for an hour. It's like 3 hours later. We're like
Yep.
5 coffees deep. I'm like, oh, maybe we should go home.
Yeah, that's how you know you're having fun.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
Courtney, thank you so much for kicking off the New Year episode. We are going to be posting this soon within the next few weeks. So, yeah, I don't know why I'm like talking like this is live right now. Anyway, thank you so much, everyone, for listening to another episode of Visibility Era, the podcast. We'll see you next time.